In 1978, the Tyler Police Department in East Texas had a drug problem. Not the kind you're thinking. They hired two undercover officers to infiltrate the local drug scene, to buy, to record, to build cases. Standard procedure. The kind of operation that happens in every city in America. What happened next was not standard. What happened next was the kind of story that gets buried in court documents and forgotten because the people who were supposed to tell it were the ones who needed it to disappear. This is the story of Kim Wozencraft, Krieg Matthews, and the investigation that destroyed everything it touched. Tyler, Texas in 1978 was a city of about 70,000 people, an oil and rose town in the piney woods of East Texas, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and trust in local institutions ran deep. Kim Wozencraft was 22 years old when she was recruited as an undercover narcotics officer. She was young, sharp, and capable of blending into environments that a uniformed officer never could. Krieg Matthews was her partner, older, more experienced, the one who had done this before. Their assignment was straightforward: infiltrate Tyler's drug networks, buy drugs, document dealers, build cases, report back to their supervisor, Police Chief Willie Hardy. The work required them to spend time in places where drugs were used, to socialize with dealers, to build trust slowly over weeks and months in environments saturated with methamphetamine, cocaine, and marijuana. The problem that nobody in the Tyler Police Department had adequately prepared them for, was what happens to a person who spends months immersed in that world. There were times when I'd be smoking hash with people I would later bust. Then I'd lay out a couple of lines and cocaine would answer all the questions. By 1979, both Wozencraft and Matthews were addicted, not recreationally, clinically dependent. Using drugs confiscated from dealers, drugs that were supposed to be logged as evidence, to feed habits they had developed in the line of duty. Matthews told Chief Hardy directly. He informed his superior that he had a drug problem. Hardy's response was not to remove him from the operation. Hardy gave them a few days off and told them to continue. When you are addicted to the drugs you are supposed to be confiscating, and when your continued employment depends on producing results, the temptation to cut corners does not arrive dramatically. It arrives quietly, incrementally, in the gap between what you witnessed and what you write in your report. Wozencraft and Matthews began falsifying reports, small details at first, then larger ones. They testified in court about drug transactions that had not happened the way they described. In some cases, transactions that had not happened at all. Over the course of the Tyler investigation, they assembled over 200 drug cases. Approximately 100 people were arrested. Many were convicted on the basis of testimony from Wozencraft and Matthews, testimony that in dozens of cases was fabricated. One of those cases was Amir Bora. Bora was a local businessman. When Wozencraft and Matthews had failed to make a legitimate drug buy from him, when the evidence simply wasn't there, they did not close the case. Under instruction from Chief Hardy, they fabricated a stash case against him. They claimed they had found drugs. They testified to transactions that had not occurred. Bora was convicted. On the night of April 24, 1979, someone came for them. A shotgun-wielding attacker ambushed Wozencraft and Matthews at her mobile home. Wozencraft returned fire and escaped serious injury. Matthews was shot in the arm and leg and hospitalized for over a month. The attack was almost certainly connected to the investigation. Dealers they had arrested, people who had figured out who they were, someone who had decided that the price of their work should be paid in blood. While Matthews recovered, the investigation began to collapse around them. Internal investigators had started noticing discrepancies, cases that didn't add up, testimony that contradicted physical evidence, reports that seemed to describe operations that other records couldn't confirm. In 1982, the truth surfaced. Both officers were prosecuted. They confessed. They pleaded guilty to criminal charges, including civil rights violations, for using their positions to deprive citizens of their constitutional rights through fabricated arrests and perjured testimony. Kim Wozencraft was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. Craig Matthews received a longer sentence. Willie Hardy, the police chief who had been informed of their drug use and had ordered them to continue, who had directed them to fabricate the case against Amir Bora, was also arrested and prosecuted. The people they had wrongfully convicted faced a different kind of justice. Some had their cases reviewed, others had already completed their sentences. The convictions built on false testimony were not automatically overturned. Each required individual legal action in a system that was not designed to correct itself quickly. Amir Bora spent years in legal proceedings trying to have his conviction addressed. The court records of his case became part of a federal appellate decision that is still cited in law schools today, when the subject is the limits of what law enforcement can do in the name of making cases. What those records do not capture is what it costs a person to be convicted of a crime they did not commit. To sit in a courtroom and watch two officers swear under oath that you did something you never did. To have the state's power deployed against you not in the pursuit of justice, but to cover up someone else's addiction. After her release from prison in 1983, Kim Wozencraft did something unexpected. She enrolled at Columbia University, earned a graduate degree, and wrote a novel based on what had happened in Tyler. She called it Rush. Random House published it. The film rights sold for $1 million before the manuscript was even finished. MGM produced the movie in 1991, starring Jason Patric and Jennifer Jason Leigh. It was marketed as a gritty portrait of undercover addiction and corruption. The film told the story from the perspective of the officers, their addiction, their relationship, their moral collapse, and partial redemption. Amir Bora did not appear in the film. The 100 people arrested on falsified evidence did not appear in the film. The question of what happened to them after the officers went to prison and came back out and sold their story for $1 million, that question did not appear in the film either. That is the version of this story that has been told. This is the one that wasn't. Kim Wozencraft went on to teach creative writing. Craig Matthews attempted to sue her over the book deal, a lawsuit he lost because under Texas law, no one owns the rights to their own life story. The Tyler drug cases built on false testimony became a footnote in federal court records. The people convicted in those cases became a statistic in a legal brief. What this case leaves behind is not just the question of what Wozencraft and Matthews did, it's the question of what the system did with it. A police chief who knew and ordered them to continue, a department that produced 200 cases without adequate oversight, a justice system that convicted people on testimony it had no mechanism to verify, and then a film that turned the perpetrators into protagonists. The most dangerous injustices are not the ones nobody knows about. They're the ones everybody knows about, and nobody thinks to ask who else was in the room. If this case made you stop and think, that's exactly why we made it. Hit like if you want more stories like this, and subscribe to Veil of Truth, because the cases that matter most are the ones nobody talks about.